We going, Mackay? All right, so this handout shows you a chapter-by-chapter description of what's going on based on the timeline and sequence of Jesus' ministry, which we're going to seriously start getting into here today. So, his birth and early years covers just 4 chapters, 2 in Matthew and 2 in Mark, and those don't show up on the timeline because that was like 6 BC to 4 BC, and our timeline at the bottom there only goes from 26 to 33. So John the Baptist ministry gets a mention in every single gospel, but it's a relatively small part, even though it's about a 3.5 year period of time that he was ministering. And then we're going to start looking at Jesus' ministry, and we'll see his first, second, and third years of ministry get covered to an extent in each of the gospels. But really his death, resurrection, and ascension gets the limelight in the Gospels. Crucifixion week was only 6 days or so of events, but it gets almost 1/4 of the treatment in each Gospel. In fact, in the book of John, it's all the way from chapter 13 through 21. It's a solid 40% or so of the book of John. So there's not nearly as much content towards the earlier parts of what's going on, and it starts getting heavier and more well covered once you get to his third year and then his last week and even into the ascension and such. So the amount of material that we go through is going to vary a little bit from week to week here, but I wanted to give you this as a reference point, and now you can see the chapters of the Gospels that we're talking about in every single lesson here. Alright, so we're continuing through the life of Jesus, and we're going to go through the beginning of Jesus' ministry, and we should get into his first year. I'm not positive we're going to complete it tonight because we have a couple other things too. But coming up here, we'll get to his second year of ministry, his third year of ministry, crucifixion week, and then we'll cover the resurrection to ascension, and we still have 1 week to spare before Thanksgiving break. And so if we need to, we'll have a catch-up week there. Review week, or we'll jump into the book of Acts. We will see how we do it. Anyway, tonight we're going to continue covering information drawn out of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And that will be the next month and a half here. Before we jump into the gospel accounts here, though, one of the things I wanted to look at, we didn't get to last week, was the reliability of the New Testament. So this is a book that was written almost 2,000 years ago, not quite. Why is it that we can trust what's been transmitted to us?
So it's classic literature.
Right, this is classic literature. From Greek and Roman times. You ever play a game of telephone? Usually doesn't come out the other side very well, does it? A lot of people use the argument that a game of telephone usually garbles the message pretty badly. And so the question is, can we actually trust what we've gotten today, or has it been garbled in the transmission process? So, we'll look at this a little bit. Ancient texts, they all got written by hand because they didn't have typewriters or computers or anything of the sort. And they got copied by hand because they didn't have a printing press until Gutenberg invented it in 1453 or something. AD. Since they're copied by hand, there's usually going to be a limited number of manuscripts created, and a limited number of them are going to be generated and transmitted and survive. So whereas today, if Amazon thinks that an author is going to be a bestseller, they'll print 1 million copies of it, and then maybe 20 million copies will ultimately get sold eventually. Back in the day, their greatest works would have a limited number of editions, and they're extraordinarily valuable because it took somebody forever to write the whole thing down by hand. In the Roman days, they actually would have slaves that were educated and would spend several years in school learning how to write, just simply so they could be a slave transcribing books through their entire life. That was the purpose of education, was so you could be a slave. So, in ancient literature, there's a certain number of manuscripts for everything that we have surviving today. So for instance, the work of Beowulf, Danish mythology or mythological work of some historical accuracy, there is actually only a single manuscript in existence. There isn't even 2 copies of it.
Where is it?
I don't know where it is. I would guess Denmark, but I'm not positive.
Where's Denmark?
Denmark is in northern Europe, just north of Germany and south of Norway and Sweden, on the junction between the Baltic Sea and the North Sea.
Okay.
So the second one, the Commentaria de Bella Gallico, that is the wars Julius Caesar fought to conquer Gaul. This one, there's only 75 surviving manuscripts. The first historian who ever recorded anything in history was Herodotus. He was a Greek author. And there's only 60 manuscripts and some fragments of papyrus for his manuscript. The Iliad was one of the greatest works of the ancient world, and there was 1,757 manuscripts of the Iliad that are still around today. It is a lot. It was a bestseller. A lot of slaves spent their lives just making copies of the Iliad. Now, nobody really disputes these manuscripts. There'll be a little bit of differences between them, but these are usually considered to be authoritative manuscripts. And you can see some of the changes and transitions. One manuscript will have a few discrepancies from another one. But it's pretty easy to tell what the original work was because of the manuscripts, they're all pretty consistent. Now, of course, Beowulf being the exception because it is only one manuscript that is the definitive work that we have today that we work from. There's nothing else of a copy. Look a little deeper at the Commentaria de Bello Gallico because this is one that is considered to be a very authoritative work. Like I mentioned earlier, is Julius Caesar's campaign to conquer Gaul. Modern day France, 58 to 50 BC is when he was fighting these wars. You don't need to know all these details. But anyway, Julius Caesar was the author of this. It is the only primary source of those wars. No one else wrote anything about it. The Gauls that all got defeated, they didn't write anything about their wars. And so the only thing we know about Julius Caesar's wars in Gaul, which is modern day France, is what he wrote down about it. Now, would you be a little suspicious if only one person, the winner of the campaign, is the only person who writes anything down? Maddie?
What if the losers didn't write anything down because they felt so bad about it?
Or they're all dead.
That too.
That too. Or they did write something down about it, but the Romans burned them because they didn't want a counter-narrative to be known.
Well, maybe that's why they're the winners.
Yep, that's why the Romans were the winners too. Anyway, there's a few secondary sources, other people that knew of Julius Caesar's work and commented on it, but they all rely on Julius Caesar's account to talk about it, and so everybody who said anything about the Gallic Wars is coming out of Julius Caesar's mind. So there's a certain propaganda element to it because Julius Caesar was also an aspiring politician. He was trying to convince everybody in Rome that he would make a greater dictator than the other guy. And so he was using this to convince everybody how amazing he was as a general. So you can see that slant to it, obviously. But when you look at this a little closer, like 58 to 50 BC are the dates of when these events took place. Now the manuscripts, I said there were 75 earlier, the oldest 5 are from the 9th to 11th centuries AD, which means that they are at least 900 to 1,000 years after the events took place. So that would be like somebody writing down an account of the invasion of Afghanistan and it getting transmitted for 900 years, and then in the year 2915 we have the last surviving account of it, and there's just nothing known between it. There's a few more though. 16 of those 75 come from the 12th to 14th centuries. And then just before the printing press, there was a more popular account, and so it got a lot more copies in the 15th century. Two of these copies all end up in like two different families. So some of the original copies had a couple discrepancies, and then the copies that come later copy those same discrepancies. And one of them is a standalone work of just this one, and then another one actually comes with his works of Julius Caesar, because he wrote 4 or 5 other things as well. But it wasn't printed by a printing press until 1469. Now today, no historian really disputes the authenticity of the account of Julius Caesar's invasion of Gaul. It's taken at face value, with the caveat that it's obviously propaganda from Julius Caesar, but they think that what we got today is what Julius Caesar wrote, with a few minor discrepancies potentially. But they'll take it at pretty much face value.
With 1,000 years in between them?
1,000 years in between, exactly.
People can just lie. I don't know. Okay.
And it does happen. Like, there's 4 other accounts of various different wars that are attributed to Julius Caesar that they think are spurious. Pseudo-epigraphic is the technical term, where somebody else wrote it well after the fact. It wasn't actually Julius Caesar writing it. So he's got a couple books that are pretty sure he actually wrote it, and other people talked about it in the days that when Julius Caesar was writing it, and so it was a known work in his own generation. It's just no accounts or no copies from that old actually survived.
That we know.
That we know, yeah. Could be discovered someday, because they make discoveries in monasteries in Europe from time to time of things they didn't think were still extant.
When they were making the ones 1,000 years later, did they have access to the original one? Or was
Well, they would have had access to older ones, but the older ones may not have survived. The next,
Oh.
so it's not like they just
you can't like corroborate them to? Okay.
yeah. Anyhow, once you compare this to the New Testament, you'll see that we've got a pretty good track record as far as classic authors go, like Micaiah said. So in the New Testament, there's 5,700 Greek manuscripts, over 10,000 Latin manuscripts, and 9,300 other manuscripts from other languages like Armenian, Coptic, and Syriac.
Talk about a bestseller.
Yes, exactly. Talk about a bestseller. In the ancient world, it was a bestseller. And it was on everybody's gotta preserve this book list. So when the Vikings are coming and the monks are running out of the monastery, they're leaving Julius Caesar's works in the monastery library to burn, and they're grabbing their old version of the New Testament and taking it with them. So they survived.
That's what. Yep. When the Vikings are coming to burn down your monastery, what 3 writings are you grabbing?
Now some of these are kind of
I think I just
interesting.
get out.
Like every single one of these, this is about 25,000 manuscripts, and they keep finding more, so that adds to the list every now and again. But like Coptic, that's down in Ethiopia, and so that was separated from the Catholic Church for over 1,000 years. They didn't know there were Christians down south of Egypt any longer until they sent a mission down there after 14 or 1500, and they discovered there's Christians down in Ethiopia still. And so that one survived independent of the Catholic Church
their Bible-
for over 1,000 years.
Was their New Testament still like pretty much the exact same?
Yep, still the same. Armenian is a kingdom of Armenia, which was outside the Roman Empire as well. And then Syriac is, that would be like in the area of Syria that was under the Roman Empire for a good while, but then the Parthians invaded it, and then the Muslims invaded it later. And so this is not just a Roman conspiracy or a Roman Empire conspiracy. But then let's look at how old some of the oldest manuscripts are here. So we have complete manuscripts from the 4th century AD. So 2 of them, Codex Sinaiticus, which which is named after the Sinai Peninsula because it was probably from a monastery in the Sinai Peninsula. And that one was written or copied down 325 to 360 AD. Codex Vaticanus, because it's in the Vatican City. That one dates 300 to 350 AD. And those are complete editions of the New Testament. Now, the significance of those dates jumped out at me when I was doing this research because the New Testament canon was not actually decided fully until 323 AD. And so these are essentially some of the first edition New Testaments after they decided which books were in the New Testament and which ones weren't. But they actually have older manuscripts that go further back. There is a big papyrus, it's called Papyrus 75. It has most of the Gospel of Luke and most of the Gospel of John. And that one dates to 175 or 225 AD. And this is back when full New Testament was not necessarily agreed upon, but people were still passing various Gospels and epistles around. Another one, Papyrus 52, has a small snippet. It has 7 lines from a few verses in John chapter 18. It's a very small fragment, but it's very clearly pieces of these verses. And that one dates back somewhere 100 to 150 AD. But John only wrote that book in about 90 AD. So this is a copy within living memory of the original actually being written. And the other thing that's really significant is that these papyrus agree with the full manuscripts that come from the 4th century. There's no significant changes. They're in agreement. So when it comes to ancient texts, if we're going to take Julius Caesar's works at face value, good reason to take the New Testament at face value as being an authentic, accurate work too. And just to show you, after 300 years of copying, the extent of the changes between those two complete manuscripts is an example here. The bold is what's different. So in one it says, now the birth of Jesus Christ, and the difference in the other one is now the birth of Christ Jesus. Does that say the same thing? Just a small little discrepancy. Rearrange 2 words. Continues on. It was as follows. Jesus was betrothed to his mother Mary, to Joseph, and the was betrothed is just a slightly different Greek word. It has the same meaning though. So it means was betrothed in Greek, 2 different words. Let's see, going down to the bottom it says, as Joseph her husband was righteous and did not want to publicly shame her. In the other version it says, as Joseph her husband was righteous and did not want to make a show of her.
Same meaning.
Did they actually get divorced?
No, they didn't. He was intending to divorce her quietly, but then he had a dream of the angel Gabriel coming to him and said, what is conceived in Mary is of the Holy Spirit. She has not been unfaithful, essentially. Go ahead and don't be afraid to marry her. And so Joseph took her and married her anyway, even though she was already pregnant. So, anyhow, so when we talk about there being discrepancies in various different texts of the New Testament, this is about as serious as it gets, where it doesn't have any impact on the meaning, just small little changes, and they can accumulate. If you get a copy that's from the later part of the Middle Ages, it's going to have an accumulation of changes, but you can track those when you track from one manuscript to the next manuscript and be like, oh, this copyist had this source and that's why this one continues. So it's a pretty reliable book, and it has actually been very reliably transmitted to us. Does anybody have any questions on that? All right. I don't remember if this came up last week, but I also wanted to throw in here this evening the AD-BC system and how it was created, because Jesus was born in 5 BC and he's crucified in 33 AD, and what what does all of this mean? And this came from a monk. He was a Scythian. They were nomads of the plains of Ukraine. And he was actually from Romania on the Black Sea. He was moving over to Rome in AD 500. And he was the guy who was the brainchild of the BC AD system. BC meaning before Christ and AD meaning Anno Domini in Latin, which means in the year of our Lord.
Well, that's not after death.
Yes, but it's not after death because Jesus was still very much alive in 1 AD. He was a 5-year-old.
Well, that's stupid.
Yes, isn't it?
Can you go back for 1 second?
Okay, I'll go back for 1 second.
Yes, I'll be so fast.
Mr. Semino messed me up.
You missed me too.
Why?
Rude.
AD after death?
Yes.
Yep, that's
Did
the
he say
cheating way to remember it, but Anno Domini. Alright, so Dionysius did not like the current dating system because it was created by Diocletian, a Roman emperor who was notorious for persecuting Christians. The greatest persecution of the Christian church up to that point in time was under his reign. And they had been counting the years from the beginning of his reign. And so 525 AD was known in that day as approximately 250 or 260 in the year of Diocletian. And so he thought it was just terrible that the Christian church was dating everything to the beginning of the reign of the guy who persecuted them horribly. And so he thought we'd come up with a different system. Yeah, so 242 is the year of Diocletian. So BC is before Christ, AD is Anno Domini, and there is no year 0. He was trying to start it when Jesus was born. His calculations are not preserved, and he made a 4-year mistake, but we don't know what that 4-year mistake was. But everybody since then has concluded that Jesus was born in the neighborhood of 5 BC, maybe 4 BC, not 1 BC. And even the 5 BC was just 6 days before 4 BC. So we don't know what mistake he made, but that's why Jesus was born 4 years before he was supposed to have been born. Now, as everything takes a long time to actually get adopted, change goes slowly. His system of dating was not actually used all that much for quite a while. And so for 250 years, which is as long as our country has even been around, most people still use the year or dating system of Diocletian's reign. Charlemagne, emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, French king, exactly, he was the one who popularized it because a monk in his court decided he was going to make it popular. And so this happened in the late 8th century, and because Charlemagne was a really powerful, popular king and conquered a good chunk of Europe, his dating system that he popularized spread all across Western Europe. So that is why we have the AD BC system today, and that is why it is off ever so slightly.
Because a monk messed it up.
A monk made a mistake.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm gonna say that.
Yep. Alright, so shifting into Jesus' ministry. Jesus' ministry is divided up by Passovers. There are 4 of them that are mentioned. And so we can hinge all of the events of his ministry between all of these Passovers. Do you remember the Passover was one of the feasts of the Jews that they would celebrate how the Israelites came out of Egypt. And this was one of the most important feasts, and it was celebrated quite regularly in the New Testament, and it was a pretty big national holiday. So in John chapter 2, verse 13, it says, "The Passover of the Jews was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem." And that is the first Passover mentioned in Jesus' ministry. and we can date when that Passover was from the 7 verses later. The Jews said, "It has taken 46 years to build this temple. Will you raise it up in 3 days?" They didn't understand what Jesus was talking about. But Herod had started a building project on this. It was renovating the temple, essentially, and making it much, much larger. And so we know when that started, and so we can date this Passover, the beginning of Jesus' ministry, very accurately to 30 AD. And the event that was taking place in that chapter is the first time that Jesus cleared all the money changers out of the temple area. Then a couple chapters later in John, chapter 5, verse 1, it says, "After this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem." And this is the Passover that is just a touch more enigmatic. Some people contend that Jesus only ministered for 2.5 years instead of 3.5 years, but the consensus opinion is that this feast of the Jews was a Passover, which would mean that Jesus was ministering for 3.5 years, and so we are going to assume that is correct. And so this Passover would be in 31 AD. And this is when Jesus heals somebody at the pool of Bethesda. Third Passover is described in the story of the feeding of the 5,000. And that miracle of Jesus is the only one that is recorded in all 4 Gospels. So that makes it convenient to connect the timing of events from Gospel to Gospel, because you remember most of the book of John is unique. However, the feeding of the 5,000 has a corollary passage in all 3 of the other Gospels. So you can tell what happens before and after. This is in John chapter 6, verse 4. This would be 32 AD. So then the last Passover, the 4th one, 33 AD, is recorded also in the book of John. So you'll note that John has all 4 of these mentioned in sequence. John 13:1 says, "Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end." And this Passover is the feast they're celebrating at the Last Supper. So that is actually connected to our Easter celebration today. So the Jewish Passover usually happens within a few weeks of the Christian Easter holiday. They're not always the same week because the Jewish calendar and the Christian calendar sometimes diverges a touch. So that is the framework by which we can actually date the events of Jesus' ministry into his various different years. Anybody have any questions on that? All right, so we will jump into the beginning of Jesus' ministry. So first off, Jesus is collecting disciples. John the Baptist is baptizing at the Jordan, and that is where Jesus meets John and Andrew. Remember, this is when John the Baptist says, "Behold the Lamb of God who's come to save the world," or something like that, the David George paraphrase. And John and Andrew see Jesus, they look at John, and then they start following Jesus. Not all of John's disciples did that, but the 2 of them did. This is all recorded in John chapter 1.
Is that the same Bethany as like around the end of his ministry?
Nope, this is Bethany by the Jordan, not Bethany by Jerusalem. So, just like there's a Baldwin, Wisconsin, and a Baldwin, Minnesota, and a few other Baldwins across the United States, there were a lot of little villages called Bethany.
What is Bethany?
The house of something. I'm not sure what. We'll look it up.
Beth.
Beth means house.
I remember.
Yep, Beth means house. So Bethlehem is the house of bread. Bethel is the house of God. Bethany is house of something. Hey, Micaiah, you want to Google that for us?
What are we looking up?
Bethany. What does Bethany mean? So Andrew fetches Peter, his brother, and
House of figs or house of affliction?
house of affliction. Isn't that awesome?
Or house of figs?
Fates?
Figs,
Figs.
as in fruit?
Oh yeah, that'd be a lot more pleasant.
Yes.
Andrew fetches Peter, they're brothers. And then Jesus, Andrew, Peter, and John leave for Galilee. On the way, Jesus finds Philip, another one of his disciples. Philip fetches Nathanael, who in the other Gospels is oftentimes called Bartholomew. This is how the first disciples start following Jesus. Maddie.
Are these basically just Jesus' friends?
Well,
Or his buddies?
no, actually, they didn't really know him too much up to this point. Like, they knew of him a little bit, but not a whole lot. This wasn't just his friend group. He was 30
How
years
would you
old, he was a
explain
carpenter.
How would you explain it?
Well, so if you read the chapter, which will happen in a few weeks here, John the Baptist is like religious guru type person, and John and Andrew have been following him, and he says, that guy over there is the Son of God. If you are following a religious fanatic in the wilderness, and he says there's an even cooler religious fanatic, you go to follow the cooler one. And then if your brother says, hey, we found the Messiah, and everybody's been waiting for the Messiah for like 2,000 years since Abraham had been around, and then all of a sudden you're like, I want to go check this guy out. And so that was how they were collecting together. And yeah, so Philip did not know Jesus beforehand, and Nathanael was like, how could anything good come out of Nazareth? And then when he meets Jesus, Jesus says, oh, I knew what you were thinking about when you were under the fig tree earlier today. And Nathanael's like, you've never seen me, how'd you know I was under a fig tree? And what do you mean you know what I was thinking under the fig tree? So, Jesus kind of revealed himself as authentic Son of God, Messiah material in the initial.
Does it actually say what he was thinking, or did the children just take a lot of liberty with that?
That's where the paraphrase version in my head is really hard. I think Jesus said, I saw you under the fig tree. I don't exactly know if it says what he was thinking.
Because in The Chosen, they have this whole backstory about how, like, he built a building.
Yeah, there's a lot of extra stuff in there, yeah.
That episode was so weird because I was folding laundry while I was watching it and I didn't have any context, and then all of a sudden he's like throwing stuff and then he's screaming underneath the tree, and I was just really confused.
Yeah, John 1's the context. So there's a lot of liberty in that backstory there.
Yeah.
So everything in The Chosen take with a couple grains of salt because they're intentionally trying to add backstory to the gospel accounts. And there's several things that are out of sequence in my opinion. So,
And there's no Rayma.
right, and there's a lot of characters that didn't get it recorded in the scripture. So, anyhow, this next chapter though is another episode of The Chosen. On the third day, so this is just 2 days after collecting his first disciples, they go to a wedding in Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother is there, and she's like, there's no wine. And so Jesus has them fill up these stone jars, and he converts somewhere between 120 and 180 gallons of water into exceedingly fine wine. This is the first miracle of Jesus that is recorded. And after the wedding feast, he and his disciples go to Capernaum. that happens before the first Passover. So at this next point here is where we officially start Jesus' first full year of ministry. Leaves Galilee, he goes to Jerusalem with some of his disciples. He hasn't collected all of them yet, but they're ones that are there include John and James and Peter and Andrew, and most likely Philip and Nathaniel as well. Possibly a few of the other ones, because we don't know how all of them got connected. Goes into the temple courts, and in the temple courts there's men selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and they're exchanging money at various tables. They're making sure that people have the right sacrifices to be offering at the temple, but they're doing this right in the temple courts instead of just in the marketplace in Jerusalem. And this irks Jesus to no end, so he makes a whip and flips over their tables and drives them out.
Act like Jesus, guys.
Say what?
Act like Jesus.
Yeah, when I was your age, Micaiah, they had these bracelets that became this phenomena. It was WWJD. What would Jesus do?
They still have those.
Yeah, I'm sure they're still around because.
What's the whole word?
Yep.
That's what my brother said.
What are people called that sell stuff?
Merchants. Yep, merchants.
That's what my brother said to me and my dad when we flipped over our Monopoly board.
Yeah. And Jesus flipped over the tables. Yep. So yeah, when you think to yourself, what would Jesus do? Flipping over tables in the temple is an option
With a whip.
with a whip, right?
He's a
Yep, he had a whip. Well, it seems like he was driving them out with a measure of force.
Did you not see the Chosen episode?
I have, but that was like years ago.
Wait, that's an episode in The Chosen?
No, it's so
Wait,
funny.
it's episodes?
I must have missed that.
Yeah, The Chosen is episodes,
Never
like
watched
TV
it.
show.
I thought it was a movie.
No, it's like seasons.
Wait a month and then you can start watching it, and then you can be like, that's out of sequence. That's not the way that happened. But
Wait, really?
yeah.
Yeah, I just sit there with my information for
How much stuff do they have as
Fair chunk if you pay attention to the timeline. I haven't compared to The Chosen. There's a lot of stuff out of sequence. It's not a big deal. It doesn't change the essence of the gospel accounts. And maybe they have a justifiable reason for it, but it's out of my sequence that I prefer. So,
Yes, I see.
alright. One of the big things is the episode with Jesus and Nicodemus in The Chosen is taking place in Galilee, and in the Bible it takes place in Jerusalem. Yes. Yeah, it's while Jesus is down in Jerusalem for the Passover that he visits Nicodemus. Nicodemus is a Pharisee, a member of the Sanhedrin, and he wants to meet with Jesus secretly during the night so that people aren't seeing him with Jesus. And Nicodemus becomes a follower of Jesus. But it's in that conversation that the famous John 3:16 verse gets quoted. And John overheard the conversation, apparently. So that's a,
And wrote it down.
and wrote it down, precisely.
Secret. He told the secret.
He wrote down the secret.
Yep, he wrote down a secret. Let's see here. We should probably pause at that point. So we'll take a start up here at John 3. Alright, so we're just getting into the first year of ministry.